If you've ever been told that you're an ENFP or an ISTJ, then you've already taken the most popular personality test in the world. But maybe you didn't know that it was a creation of a mother and daughter who transformed the theories of Carl Jung into a psychological assessment tool now used by Fortune 500 companies, the CIA, and governments around the world. Merve Emre tells a story in her new book, The Personality Brokers, The Strange History of Myers-Briggs and the Birth of Personality Testing. And she joins us now for more. Such a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you for having me.
What a bonkers history of Myers-Briggs, if I can say that.
You can, you absolutely can.
It is mind-blowing. So, most important question, of course, what type are you?
What type do you think I am?
I don't know. I'm not saying. I am not going there.
No, it's unfair. It's unfair. I'm an ENTJ.
Okay. What does that mean?
I am the commander type, or the CEO type, or less generously, the dictator type.
The audience, please keep in mind what she just said. We're going to circle back to this at the end of the interview. But one of the things that I found that was really interesting in this book is that Myers-Briggs, this type, they don't want it to be called a test. Why is that?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So the argument of Isabel Briggs Myers, the woman who created the indicator, as well as people who assess people today, is that it's not a test because it has no right or wrong answers. It's an indicator because it is indicating something to you about you based on what you have disclosed to the questionnaire or the indicator. It gets a little bit tautological when you start trying to explain the semantics of it. But the basic takeaway is that tests are things that have right and wrong answers that seek to create hierarchies between the people that take them. So if you get a higher score on a test, you're better than somebody who took a lower score on it. But the type indicator says all types are created equal, and there's no kind of judgment being passed on you if you are any particular type.
And are we talking about personality or character?
We're talking about personality. We're talking about personality, which somebody once, I thought, really brilliantly described to me as character forcibly expressed.
Well, let's take a look at a copy of the 1940s original chart. And could you please walk us through the 4 pairs of personality traits that we see there?
Sure. So the first dichotomy that you see at the very top is extroversion or introversion. And today that's basically described as where you derive your energy from. Do you derive it from being around lots of people, or do you derive it from being by yourself, alone with your thoughts? The second one is sensing and intuition, which is how you perceive the world around you. So do you perceive it through your 5 senses, or do you have these gut instincts that you are attuned to? The third is thinking or feeling, which is how you make judgments. Do you like to make decisions in a highly ordered and rational way, or are you somebody who takes into consideration the feelings of the people that are going to be impacted by the decisions that you make? And the final category, which is a little bit misleading, is judging versus perceiving. And this doesn't actually mean how judgmental are you, but rather it indicates how it is that you like to structure your life. So are you somebody who likes to have a schedule that you stick to? You like to have a plan laid out and you don't like deviations from it? Or are you somebody who thrives on spontaneity?
And then the different combinations reveal your type.
Exactly, and there's 16 different types. So part of helping somebody assess themselves is actually doing what I just did, which is walking you through those different types and having you kind of think to yourself, as she's describing those categories, how would I classify myself? How would I think about myself?
Right, and the test there is called the Briggs-Myers test, but it's actually been changed to Myers-Briggs. Why the name change?
Well, initially it was Briggs-Myers because Katherine Briggs was the mother and Isabel Briggs-Myers was the daughter. And Isabel always wanted to give her mother full credit for being a co-creator. It was changed in the 60s because somebody at the Educational Testing Services, ETS, which was thinking about buying the indicator, suggested to Isabel that all tests become shortened, and BMTI made it sound like it was typing your poop or something. So
A bowel movement?
Yes, a bowel movement. I'm sorry, that's the more gracious way to put it, yeah.
Right.
The bowel movement type indicator probably wouldn't have sold as well as the Myers-Briggs
the
type
MB.
indicator, yeah.
So at the beginning, I mentioned all these different companies that are using this indicator to assess their employees. But some people are skeptical about the merit of it. Let's take a look at the video. Sheldon, please roll.
Okay, so there's a 93-question test called the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator.
You've probably heard of it. It's the most widely used personality test in the world.
The most definitive personality test of them all is the Myers-Briggs.
And the company that makes it, CPP, reportedly earns about $20 million from the 2 million people that take it and the companies that administer it every single year.
So you take this test, you answer these 93 questions, and it tells you you're one of 16 different personality types. The only problem is that this test is completely meaningless. Clinical psychologists, psychiatrists, anyone working to understand human behavior who doesn't have a stake in the financial success of this test doesn't actually even believe in it.
One study found that as much as 50% of people who took the test twice arrived at different results, even though it was only 5 weeks later.
When you first started working on this book, were you as skeptical as the folks in the video?
I absolutely was. And I had read all of those studies. I was convinced, and I continue to be convinced, that the type indicator was, by all scientific standards, neither valid nor reliable. It didn't measure the things that it said it was measuring. So extroversion and introversion was really just a measure of how talkative you were. And it wasn't reliable. So if you took the test more than once, you were very likely to get a different result. But as I started writing the book, I realized that to me, that wasn't the interesting question.
What's the interesting question?
Well, there are two. So the first was just a kind of historical question, which was, who were the women behind it?
And it's women, because I don't think people knew that.
No, I don't think so. I mean, anytime we have a wildly popular quasi-scientific instrument that has the names of two people attached to it, it is the assumption that those people are men. And so I was curious about who these women were and how they had been completely obscured by the popularity of their creation. But then the second question I had was a more philosophical question, which was, okay, given that we already know that the indicator is neither valid nor reliable, why is it that people are still so drawn to it? Why are they so seduced by the language of type?
What did you find out? Did you find an answer for that?
Yeah, I think I did. I mean, and it links up to the biographical angle on the book. And I think the answer to that is that type provides this incredibly compelling language of the self. It gives you a way to describe who you are and what you desire and what you might want to do with yourself in a way that is not judgmental. You don't have to apologize for who you are. You can simply accept it. And because you can accept it, you can start to govern yourself according to your own standards. You become, what I say in the book, is you become the master and arbiter of your own destiny. And you're able to understand not only yourself, but the people around you. So one of the most popular kinds of emails I've gotten since the book came out are from people who first encountered the indicator in couples counseling while they were going through a separation or a divorce. And they were given the type indicator to try to figure out what their irreconcilable differences were from their partner and how those differences might be innate.
So once they knew if they were a different type, then they knew to curb their expectations or maybe to understand the person better because that's who that person is?
Exactly, to accept the person for who they were rather than to try to change that person. And so I think we are always on the lookout for these tools of self-understanding because they provide us with a sort of faith in ourselves.
I want you to read a couple of paragraphs from your book, just to get more into what the test is.
Sure.
Thanks.
There were hundreds of personality tests that promised to classify workers as normal or abnormal so that employers could avoid assigning an overly anxious or depressive man to a high-pressure job. But what if she, and the she in question is Isabel Briggs Myers, what if she could design a test that generated only positive results? It would not be a test at all, but an indicator, a device that provided information about one's personality free from judgment. The impulse to type people gestured to a basic rigidity of thought, an anti-humanist, anti-enlightenment propensity for flattening individuals into predetermined categories so that they could be managed and manipulated with greater ease.
To my ears, that sounds like two very different descriptions. What would you say is the most accurate description of Myers-Briggs?
Well, they coexist. So the first description is of an individual's experience of Myers-Briggs, which is that if you take it and you are told, here is your type is both special but also belongs to this larger world of types. And your type has a particular function in this world, and that function is good. Then that is a way of making people feel empowered or liberated by that kind of self-knowledge.
But do you think it could also be a way to make people not try to evolve because that is who I am?
Yeah, I mean, I think that could definitely be a kind of negative side effect of this, right? That one could feel compelled not to take responsibility for one's actions or to not change because they are comfortable now with who they are. But then the second paragraph that you had me read is really more about the social implications of Myers-Briggs, which is to say that if an employer knows your type and if an employer truly believes that the right way to organize a workforce is to match people to the jobs that are best suited to their types, then you can be sort of moved around or switched out or exchanged or fired according to the employer's rationale about type and type suitability. And so one of the tensions I think that sits at the heart of the book is the tension between the individual experience of type, which is often quite positive. Even for people that are skeptical, it's often quite positive. And then the way that type has been mobilized and, in the case of places like the military or the CIA, weaponized by these massive social institutions that use individuals as means to larger ends.
Part of your research involved you taking the Myers-Briggs type indicator. I don't want to say test, but I don't know how else to.
It's hard not to. That's okay. I don't forgive you. Nobody's watching. Well, I guess people are watching.
People are watching. But you write that the course was referred to as a Reeducation Program. Were you successfully re-educated?
No, I don't think I was. I think they really failed in their mission of re-education. I was told that in order to get access to the papers of Isabel Briggs Myers, I had to go through this week-long re-education program in New York where I would learn how to, they said, speak type properly. And part of it was me imparting such wisdom as, we don't refer to the indicator as a test, it's an indicator, your type never changes, all types are created equal, these kind of pithy little mantras about how we think about type. But after I took the program and I asked to get access to the archives, I was told that things had been revealed about my personality during the program that meant they didn't want to trust me with these archival materials.
They were kind of right?
I actually think, so then I was angry, right? But I actually think what I ended up producing is a far more sympathetic portrait of the two women, Katherine and Isabel, that are behind the type indicator than I could have produced in, say, short form.
Well, let's talk more about the women. Katherine was the mother, Isabel was the daughter.
Yes.
And when Isabel was younger, she came up with these child-rearing personality experiments that she conducted with her daughter. Can you tell us about those?
Yeah, so Katherine, like I said, Katherine was an extraordinary woman. She went to college at the age of 14. She graduated at the top of her class, and she married the man who graduated second. And when they left college, her parents gave her husband $200 for his postgraduate education at Johns Hopkins, and they gave her a chest of linens to decorate her new home with. And so she arrives, they moved to Washington, D.C., she arrives there, and here's an extraordinarily intelligent woman who is told that all she is capable of doing, all she's able to do, is to stay at home and raise her children. And so she has 3 of them, 2 of whom die in infancy. And with Isabel, the one who remains, she thinks, what can I do to transform motherhood into a professional occupation? How can I make it rigorous in the same way that the scientific laboratory that my husband goes to work at every day is considered rigorous? And so she comes up with what she calls the cosmic laboratory of baby training. this is, maybe good advice for us as parents, right?
Taking notes.
Yeah. The Cosmic Laboratory of Baby Training, where she practices all sorts of behavioral drills with her daughter, and she rewards her with stories when she behaves well, and she punishes her by spanking her or hitting her hands when she doesn't perform up to standard. And one of the things she starts doing in her Cosmic Laboratory is taking on other children from the neighborhood. And eventually she wants to figure out how to design really specialized programs of study for each of these children. And she designs her first personality questionnaire, which, like the Myers-Briggs type indicator, is forced choice, which means there are 2 answers to every question and you have to choose one. And they're all geared toward helping parents type their children. And so the questions are like, is your child impulsive or calm? Is he anxious or can he soothe himself? Does he sleep in his own bed or come to your bed every night?
And it's successful because she ends up writing a column, too, for a magazine about how she's raised this exceptional child, because Isabel goes on to do great things.
That's exactly right. So she becomes a kind of parenting guru in the 19-teens. And she calls herself Elizabeth Child, and she calls her daughter Suzanne. And she bills herself as the mother of this exceptional little girl, Suzanne, who learns to read at the age of 4, masters stenography by the age of 9, speaks in Latin and Greek and Italian by the age of 12. And so she becomes this model for other mothers of how to transform all of the sort of domestic drudgery of motherhood and domestic labor into something exciting and creative and professional.
While you were writing this book, you have a 10-month-old, right?
I have a 2.5-year-old and a 10-month-old, yes.
Did you find yourself applying some of the things that you found out while researching this book in your own day-to-day life?
Well, I didn't start my own cosmic laboratory. I bet I could make a lot of money doing it, though.
Because the ethics, too, of that, like using your child as a test subject, anyway.
No, absolutely. I mean, I don't think I implemented anything with my children, but of course, the thing I was thinking about while I was writing the book was, I started writing it when my first son was born, and I finished writing it when my second one was born. And I remember just writing the early chapters and looking at them and thinking, who are you? Mm-hmm. And is anything I'm doing with you, does anything I do with you matter? Or will whoever you are just kind of emerge from this sort of unresponsive little creature that requires so much care and devotion? So.
And Katherine, because I got the sense that maybe she was a little jealous of Isabel.
Oh, totally, yeah. I mean, she had created this high-functioning specimen who was really outperforming her own mother. And then she left. She went to college and she started to have this more independent life. And I think her mother experienced that kind of proverbial empty nest syndrome. Yeah. I think she experienced it in a much darker and more profound way.
And someone that she leaned on from before, she actually based that test on Carl Jung, on his theories on personality types. And you write that Katherine made his work eminently useful. What did Jung think of Katherine's use of his work?
Well, they have a very fraught relationship. So when she discovers Psychological Types, his 1923 book, for the first time, all she does for the next 5 years is read it. And she copies every page from it out on these little 3x5 note cards. And she starts writing to him.
And he responds.
And he responds in a way that isn't just, like he's responding to some fan's letter. He takes her questions very, very seriously. And he tries to explain to her, he tries to clarify places where there might have been misunderstandings. And then she becomes quite obsessed with him. So she creates a kind of a fantastical relationship between the two of them. And that relationship is at times sexual. She writes erotic fan fiction about him, where he has come to Washington, D.C., and she is his patient, and they're living in an apartment together and just trying really hard not to have sex with each other.
And she's married.
And she's married, yeah. Which, I mean, people fantasize, that's fine.
Yeah, but I just thought it was so interesting because those times it was such a taboo, right?
Right, of course. And she's also writing quite disappointed emails to her, oh my God. She's writing quite disappointed letters to her husband at the same time. About how he can't ever really touch her inner life in the same way that he can. So, and then she decides to start her own sort of amateur psychoanalytic practice where she is taking on young girls in the neighborhood as her clients, as her patients. And she starts writing to him about these patients that she's taken on, and she says, they're really your patients because I'm your disciple, you're my maker, she calls him. I'm speaking for you, and you're speaking through me. And at that point, he starts to withdraw from their relationship.
And discussing Katherine Briggs' desire to practice psychology, you refer to her as an amateur in the most promising and most dangerous sense of the word. How so?
So the word amateur, the root of it is from the Latin amo, amare, to love. And when I say most promising, I mean she was deeply passionate, fanatical about her project. She really was in love with the idea of becoming a kind of a Jungian disciple. And dangerous because that kind of love has so many blind spots. And so when she was taking on these neighborhood girls as patients, as clients, she didn't realize the ways in which she was intruding into their lives and destabilizing their lives in order to make herself feel useful, in order to sort of fill the need that she had after her own daughter left.
And eventually Katherine dies, and then Isabel dies. But before she dies, she signs with Consulting Psychologist Press in 1995, or CPP, and they have been the official publishers of the Myers-Briggs Personality Index. Do you think that Katherine and Isabel would be happy with what CPP has done with their product?
No, I think they would be appalled by what CPP has done with their product, because Katherine and Isabel especially toward the end of her life.
Because she took it over, right?
She took it over, yes. She took it over in 1944. She took over her mother's system of thought and actually designed the indicator itself. So she's the one who designed the questionnaire. And her mother was, by the way, opposed to having a questionnaire at all. Her mother said, I have spent my entire life learning how to type people. A questionnaire can't possibly do what I can do. So Katherine was opposed to the whole idea of having the questionnaire in the first place. So she would definitely be horrified. But even Isabel, who designed the questionnaire, toward the end of her life, really started to articulate a code of ethics around using it. So people were not supposed to just be handed the questionnaire and fill it out and then get their type back. There was supposed to be a whole process, a therapeutic process, of walking somebody through the different types and having them self-assess, and then learning their type and debriefing about it. And as I understand it, that is very rarely the way that people actually encounter the indicator. But there are even more specific things about the design of the indicator that she would have taken issue with. So for instance, when she wrote the original descriptions of the 16 different types, they were highly specific. And one of the conditions of CPP purchasing it from her was that she would write them in a more general way, so that many different kinds of people could identify with the type. And
making it even more vague in a way.
More vague, right, exactly. And so then it starts to, I think this is why many people draw the comparison to something like a horoscope, because the descriptions of the horoscope could just as easily fit you as it could me, even though I'm a Virgo and you're a
Gemini.
A Gemini, okay, see? And the same thing is true for the type indicator, which is that really the descriptions of the individual types could really apply to just about anybody. And Isabel was on her deathbed when she was trying to sell this. She was deeply afraid that her life's work would die with her.
In a way, though, we only have a few minutes left.
Sorry.
But in a way, no, it's great. In a way, because I think Isabel and Katherine they both wanted to make history. They both wanted to be remembered. So even though it might not be what they wanted, we're here talking about them.
We are, and I mean, that is one of the things I am so thrilled about, which is to say that whatever you may think of the indicator, whether you are a skeptic or a true believer, these are two women who did something extraordinary at a time when they were told they were not allowed to do anything extraordinary as women. And so to me, that is the more interesting and important legacy of the book, rather than adjudicating or trying to pass judgment on whether you should or shouldn't believe in type.
And now Myers-Briggs is so big that even Game of Thrones, there's an indicator test.
Oh, is there?
My God.
Of course there is. Yes, of course there
And
is.
at the beginning when I asked you, you said you were ENTJ.
Yes.
But for the Game of Thrones personality test, you are also ENTJ, which is Tywin Lannister?
Right. He's
Does
the
that
one
match up?
he's the one who gets killed on the toilet, right?
Yes,
In
that's the
season
dad.
3, that's the dad.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm gonna have to say I'm a Daenerys. I'm the mother of dragons.
But with that, I mean, it's fun, and BuzzFeed does a lot of these,
Right.
personality tests.
Right.
But with these knockoffs, like the Game of Thrones personality test, do you think that affects our perception of the validity of personality testing?
Oh, it does. I mean, I think those are almost kind of wonderful parodies of the indicator and its flexibility. But what I think is even more interesting is how, anytime I've been typing a lot of journalists as I've been doing press stuff for this book.
I'm getting nervous.
No, don't be. But anytime I type somebody, the first question they ask me is, what celebrity is my type? And so I, go on my phone and I check. But I think that impulse to identify your type with a celebrity or to identify your type with a fictional character, I think that speaks to the ways in which type both seems to be pointing us out as individuals, but also wants us to feel like we're part of a larger social ecosystem. And we want to identify with the people who are the most visible, the most famous, the most glamorous in that social ecosystem. So we want to take ourselves from being personalities who can be typed to being personalities in the most glamorous sense of the word, which is celebrities.
Well, I was actually going to ask you, we seem to have this desire of trying to figure out who we are. The self-help industry,
Right.
millions of dollars. The personality test industry, millions of dollars. Where does this come from, this need to want to discover who we are as individuals?
I mean, it seems to me the most human impulse. It seems completely inherent to the idea of being a conscious human being, of wanting to know who you are, what you desire. But I also think part of it is historical. Like you said, the self-care movement has been so big for the last 3 or 4 decades. And we are constantly told or reminded that we need to be working on ourselves, that we need to self-actualize, that we need to take care of ourselves. And so I do think it's both a human phenomenon, but one that's been absolutely enhanced by all of the emphasis we put on the individual as being the most important figure in culture today.
And having done this, have you changed your perception of it?
Of the indicator or of, I mean, I started out a real skeptic. I didn't think it had any value whatsoever. And I thought the people who did buy into it were completely deluded. But the more I wrote the book, and as I told you, the more I had these sort of experiences with my very young children and thinking about their personalities, the more sympathetic I became to the desire to find something, a language to anchor ourselves at times when life feels messy or complicated. And we want something simple and clarifying that points to a way forward.
Merve, this book is fantastic.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
And thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you for having me.
The Agenda with Steve Bacon is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.